Article 184 Logic Canon 2607 Logic is a formal system of argument based on the principles of inference and reason by which propositions are properly expressed to achieve consistent conclusions across a wide variety of subjects. Canon 2608 There are three forms of valid logic based on the approach to time and the chronology of events as well as the number of inputs, propositions, and options of conclusion, that being bivalent linear, multivalent linear and multivalent multilinear. Bivalent linear logic is based on the presumption of single chronological set of dependent time events and only one of two possible outcomes or conclusions. And 2. Multivalent linear logic is based on the presumption of single chronological set of dependent time events and two or more possible outcomes or conclusions. And 3. Multivalent multilinear logic is based on the presumption of a multiple set of interdependent time events and two or more possible outcomes or conclusions. And Canon 2609 Only multivalent multilinear logic is capable of approximating to any degree of accuracy the reality of divine law, natural law or cognitive law. Both multivalent linear logic and bivalent linear logic are wholly unable to accurately portray the reason, function and effect of any real-world events with any degree of accuracy. Canon 2610 While bivalent linear logic is the most unnatural system for portraying, recreating or analyzing the reason, cause and effect of any real-world events, it is the most functional of all three logic models in terms of law because of its simplicity. Therefore, bivalent linear logic is the foundation of all positive law or law derived from positive law. Canon 2611 As bivalent linear logic is the most unnatural system for portraying, recreating or analyzing the reason, cause and effect of any real-world events, it cannot be used in law to describe cognitive law, natural law or divine law. Furthermore, bivalent linear logic can only be applied to fictitious persons, not to actual men or women. Canon 2612 As bivalent linear logic is wholly unnatural to the real world, all men and women must be granted the right of free will and consent to be adjudicated according to bivalent linear logic through persons. Canon 2613 Bivalent linear logic is based on three laws of reason being identity, non-contradiction and bivalency being, The law of identity states that an object is the same as its identity, and 2. The law of non-contradiction or the exclusion of paradox states that a valid proposition cannot state something that is and that is not in the same respect and at the same time, and 3. The law of bivalency, excluded middle, states that conclusions will resolve themselves to one of two states being valid or invalid. Article 185 Inference Canon 2614 Inference, or syllogism is the act of drawing a conclusion by the use of deductive logic or inductive logic. Hence, the conclusion drawn through logic is also called an inference. Canon 2615 The word inference comes from Latin infero meaning lowest, bottom of, simplest and insus meaning to struggle up, climb, to strive, to give birth to. Canon 2616 The word syllogism comes from the ancient Greek word, syllogismos, meaning conclusion, inference. Canon 2617 In logic, inference is equivalent to conclusion. Article 186 Logical form Canon 2618 Logical form is the narrowly accepted and required form of words or symbolic variables necessary for the system of logic to function properly on given inputs of argument concerning a particular subject. All arguments must comply to the restrictions of logical form first, before the system of logic can be reliably used. Canon 2619 Logical form differs substantially from general language expression of argument in that the subject and predicate must be strictly arranged within a certain relationship of meaning. Copula, according to the following core rules: there, a subject is generally the first element of a valid logical expression, followed by the b copula represented by a limited number of operators and conjunctions and then followed by c, the predicate describing the quality, attributes or assumptions concerning a, the subject, and 2, gender, tense, declensions are generally considered irrelevant to valid logical form and are removed. Canon 2620. Traditional logic and modern logic differs primarily in the application of logical form. According to traditional logic, only one copula or modifier existed between the subject and the predicate, rendering a limited number of expression constructions. However, in modern logic, both the subject and the predicate may have modifiers, rendering multiple generalities. Article 187. Deductive Logic. Canon 2621. Deductive logic, also known as deductive reasoning, is a formal method of achieving an inference using bivalent linear logic by the assumption a certain conclusion necessarily follows from a set of premises or hypothesis. Canon 2622. According to bivalent linear logic, a deductive argument is considered valid if the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises themselves considered valid and true. Canon 2623. In bivalent linear logic, deductive arguments are valid, or invalid, verified or unverified, never true or false. Canon 2624. The simplest form of deductive logic is called the law of detachment. A single conditional statement is made, and then a hypothesis, P, is stated. The conclusion, Q, is deduced from the hypothesis and the statement. The most basic form being, I, as P tends towards Q, PQ, 2, P, hypothesis stated 3, Q, conclusion given. Canon 2625. The second simplest form of deductive logic is called the law of syllogism. Two conditional statements are made concerning A, B and C. The conclusion is deduced by combining the hypothesis of one statement with the conclusion of another. The most basic form being, I, if A equals B, 2, and B equals C, 3, then A equals C. Article 188. Inductive Logic. Canon 2626. Inductive logic, also known as inductive reasoning, is a formal method of achieving an inference through bivalent linear logic by the derivation of general principles from specific instances or prior knowledge. Canon 2627. Whereas deductive logic seeks to establish validity in terms of absolutes, inductive logic indicates that a logical argument supports a conclusion to some degree, inductive probability, without absolute certainty. Therefore, inductive logic permits the consideration of certain real-world uncertainties reflected in superior forms of logic within the inferior bivalent linear logic framework. Canon 2628. Inductive logic depends upon two key concepts being the laws of probability and certainty. Therefore, the strongest form of conclusion by inductive logic is when one is certain beyond reasonable doubt that a conclusion is probably true. Canon 2629. As inductive logic introduces some relevance to real-world uncertainty to the system of bivalent linear logic used for all lesser laws formed under positive law, it is the preferred form of bivalent linear logic for resolving serious matters concerning such laws. Article 189. Fallacy. Canon 2630. A fallacy in logic or argument is an incorrect reasoning resulting in a misconception, or erroneous conclusion. Canon 2631. Fallacies may be divided into several categories: factual error, deliberate error, absolute error, assumed error, irrelevance error, logical error. A factual error is when a premise is made containing a factually incorrect statement of information or knowledge that can be proven to be factually false, and 2. A deliberate error is when a premise is made containing a false and incorrect information which can be proven to have been made knowingly and deliberately, thus proving an act of deliberate deception. And 3. An absolute error is when a premise is made containing a sweeping generalization which a reasonable person would immediately know cannot possibly be sustained as valid. 4. An assumed error is when a conclusion is made containing a generalization which is based on one or more assumptions that may not hold true in all cases, and v. An irrelevance error is when a conclusion is made containing minor, irrelevant information that ignores the primary inference. A logical error is when a premise or conclusion is made against the mechanical rules of logic. Canon 2632. As all valid conclusions in lesser laws formed from positive law are constructed through inductive bivalent linear logic, The presence of fallacy negates any conclusion and therefore judgment and sentence. Canon 2633. A fallacy uncorrected injures the law. Canon 2634. The only valid correction to an error is its admission, the negation of any subsequent judgment, sentence or penalty, the discipline of judicial officials responsible and the rehearing of the matter if the injury to the law and parties is not substantial. Canon 2635. A substantial injury to the law and parties due to a serious fallacy offsets any alleged offense and places the liability upon the judicial officers responsible for failing to correct the serious error. Canon 2636. A fallacy in law has no valid limitation to correction.